All right, welcome to Everyday English Pod, everybody. Today we're doing things a bit differently.
Oh, yeah.
We're taking a deep dive into how English is actually used
In the real world.
in real business situations.
Yeah.
So, we all have those conversations at work that can feel a little awkward or you're just not sure
Right.
exactly what to say. So we're going to break down a bunch of those conversations, look at the flow, the common phrases, the strategies people use.
We've pulled together a ton of examples, like real dialogues
Right.
from those everyday work situations, so you can get a feel for how these conversations naturally play out.
It's like we're giving you a backstage pass,
Right.
to the world of professional chats.
Exactly. Like, think about those meetings you have to prep for, or those tough budget talks you have to navigate.
Oh, yeah.
This is your chance to hear how native English speakers handle those situations.
Yes, exactly. And we've got examples of pretty much everything you can imagine, like preparing for those team meetings, dealing with like budget changes, refining a sales strategy,
Oh, for sure.
those looming project deadlines,
Mm-hmm.
keeping up with what's hot in consumer electronics, even how to handle client feedback the right way.
Absolutely. And then there's setting up training programs, what to do when your team's just not managing their time well.
Yeah.
There's super useful networking tips, especially for sales folks.
Oh, yeah.
And then thinking big picture, like strategies for growing internationally, performance reviews, even what to do when your supply chain goes haywire.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
There's even stuff about negotiating better deals with suppliers, thinking about work from home policies, and how to plan for those future leadership roles.
Oh, yeah. It's like a whole crash course in how to handle
about anything.
any work conversation. So let's jump right in. Let's start with something I think everybody can relate to.
Sure.
Getting ready for a team meeting.
Yeah.
Is there even a right way to do that, it seems like?
Well, it's interesting because we've got this conversation here. And what really struck me was how much they focused on just making the meeting efficient.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they talk about finalizing the agenda, really nailing down that project timeline,
Yeah.
and even like making sure the finance person is going to be there to talk about the numbers.
Oh, that's smart.
It's all about getting everyone on the same page before you even start.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about having a meeting, it's about having a good meeting.
It is, and it's like they're saying, respecting everyone's time right from the get-go
Okay.
sets a much more productive tone for the whole thing.
Right, because nobody wants to be in those meetings that are just a waste of time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so they're talking about the big things like the agenda and all that.
Uh-huh.
Do they get into the smaller details too?
Oh, absolutely. They even get into the nitty-gritty, like sending out reminders so it's fresh in everyone's minds,
Yeah.
keeping the presentation short and sweet,
Yes.
because nobody wants to sit through like a million PowerPoint slides, right?
Nobody wants death by PowerPoint.
Right. Exactly. And they even talked about having those summary slides prepared.
Okay.
Just to make sure everyone's getting those key takeaways.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, it shows you're thinking about how people process information.
Yeah. And sometimes you're in a meeting and you zone out for a second
Oh, for sure.
and then you miss something crucial.
you're like, wait, what was that?
Exactly. And then you're embarrassed to ask.
Totally.
So having that slide there is like a safety net.
It is. It's like a little cheat sheet for the meeting.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm liking these people already.
Right.
They're organized. They're thinking about the attendees. But it sounds like they go even further.
Oh, they do. They're really
Yeah.
proactive.
Like how so?
Well, they talked about things like double-checking software licenses before the meeting.
Oh my gosh, yes. The worst is when you...
You can't get the presentation to work.
Exactly.
Right. And they talked about sending the presentation to the executives beforehand.
That's it.
So they're already in the loop. And then,
So you don't waste time like going through it.
exactly.
Yeah.
That way the meeting can be more about discussion and making decisions
Right.
rather than just presenting basic information. And get this, they even schedule a rehearsal.
Ooh, fancy.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's all about that polished, professional delivery.
Yeah, it shows you're taking it seriously.
And that reflects well on everyone.
Okay, so final question on this one.
Sure.
What would you say is the biggest takeaway here for someone listening who, has to organize these meetings all the time?
I would say the big takeaway is that preparation is key. Like really putting in the effort to
Yeah.
make sure everything is in place.
Yeah.
It makes for a much more effective meeting, and it shows you respect everyone's time.
Okay, I love that. I am going to remember that for my next meeting.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to something a little bit trickier, and that is quarterly budget adjustments. Nobody likes to talk about budgets.
It can be a little bit tense, for
Yeah.
sure.
But we've got a conversation here about, people looking at those numbers and figuring out what needs to change. So what's like the first thing you notice in a conversation like this?
What really jumps out at me is this focus on being super careful with the money.
Makes sense.
Yeah, they're looking at where the budget's gone over,
Yeah.
and immediately they're talking about how to move funds around. Like specifically, they mentioned marketing and research.
Okay.
It shows they're actively managing those resources.
So it's not just about looking back, it's also about looking ahead.
Exactly. Like good budget management means you're watching what you're spending now, but you're also looking out for potential problems down the road.
Yeah. And, sometimes you have to make tough choices.
Absolutely.
All right. So they're not just like shifting money around, though, right?
Yeah.
They're actually trying to find ways to be more efficient with how they spend it.
Exactly. It's about finding those efficiencies, yeah. They talk about maybe trying to combine those vendor contracts to get a better deal, especially those software subscriptions,
Yeah.
which can really add up. And then they even talk about cutting back on travel expenses, like maybe using more video calls instead of always flying people out.
Oh, yeah, because those can really hurt.
They can.
Okay. So I'm seeing a theme here about being proactive, about really thinking things through. Is there anything else that stands out to you in terms of that?
Yeah, what really impressed me was how detail-oriented they were. Like they talk about revising proposals, making sure the finance committee understands those big changes and double-checking those revenue forecasts with the sales and marketing teams.
Okay.
It's all about making sure everything adds up and that those adjustments actually make sense.
Right. It's not just about like throwing numbers around. It's about having a plan.
Exactly. It's about that strategic approach to managing the budget.
Okay, so let's talk about timelines. How much pressure are they under to get all this done?
Oh, it's definitely a tight deadline. They mentioned the finance committee needs an update ASAP, so they have to finalize those adjustments pretty quickly. But the thing is, they're not just rushing through it.
Right.
They're still making sure that everything aligns with the big picture, like the overall yearly goals.
Right.
And they're flagging any discrepancies, so there are no surprises later on.
So it's like a balancing act,
It is.
being quick, but also being accurate.
Yeah, it's about being both efficient and thorough.
So for someone who's maybe new to these kind of budget discussions, what's like the one thing they should take away from this?
I think the key message is that managing a budget well requires a really analytical mindset. Like, you need to be on top of those numbers, make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck, and be prepared for those unexpected financial bumps in the road.
I like that. Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about something a little more exciting. How do you get more customers? How do you refine a sales strategy to really boost those numbers?
Yeah, now we're talking. This is where things get interesting.
Right. So we've got an example here of a conversation about exactly that. So what jumps out at you? What are they focusing on?
Well, what really struck me is how data-driven their approach is and how closely they're watching what's happening in the market.
Oh.
Right from the start, they're talking about expanding into new markets and, how to position their brand. But it's all based on data about those new customer segments they're trying to reach.
Oh, that's smart.
It's like they're saying, we need to know who we're talking to before we start talking.
Yes, exactly. You can't just sell to everyone. You got to know who wants your product.
Exactly. You got to tailor your message.
Okay, so they're looking at their own internal data. But are they also like looking outside the company as well?
Oh, absolutely. They're thinking about the big picture, like maybe working with influencers to build trust.
Oh, that's so important these days.
It is. People trust recommendations from people they follow. And then they also talk about changing their pricing structure, to maybe attract different types of customers.
Okay, like how so?
Well, like maybe offering different tiers of service or giving discounts for bulk purchases.
Right.
Just trying to be more flexible and appealing to a wider range of customers.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to experiment to see what works best.
Exactly. It's all about being responsive to the market.
Okay, so this is where I think technology comes into play.
For sure.
They mention looking at automation tools to find those potential customers.
Yeah.
And making sure that everything's integrated with their CRM system. So CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management.
Right.
It's basically how companies keep track of all their interactions with customers.
It's like a big database of all your customer information and interactions.
Right. So it helps them understand their customers better.
Exactly. And it helps them personalize those interactions.
Okay. And then they also mentioned something about their sales materials.
Oh, yeah. They noticed that some of it looked a little outdated.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah. And they want to make sure that everything reflects their current offerings. So they're planning to give it a refresh, make it look modern and up to date.
That makes sense. And then the other thing they talked about was training the sales team.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Right, to make sure everybody understands the new strategy.
Exactly. Everyone needs to be on the same page with those new strategies, that updated pricing, how to use those digital tools effectively.
Yes, because what's the point of having this great strategy
Right.
if nobody knows how to actually use it?
Exactly. You got to equip your team with the knowledge and the tools.
Okay, so it sounds like they've got a really solid plan here.
They do.
Mhm.
And they're not just leaving it to chance.
Right.
They talk about setting up those key performance indicators, those KPIs,
Mhm.
so they can track their progress and see if those changes are actually making a difference.
Okay, so they're not just setting it and forgetting it.
Right.
They're constantly checking,
They're monitoring, they're adapting.
adjusting.
Exactly. They're being proactive and flexible, which is so important in sales.
Right, because the market's always changing. What works today might not work tomorrow.
You got to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, okay, so last question on this one.
Go ahead.
What would you say is the main message for someone listening who's maybe trying to revamp their own sales strategy?
I would say the key takeaway is that a good sales strategy is always evolving.
Mhm.
You got to stay on top of that market information, use technology wisely, and always be looking for ways to improve, especially through feedback.
I like that. Okay, let's move on to another very common but sometimes stressful situation, and that is dealing with project deadlines.
Oh yeah, those can be nail biters.
Right. So we have a conversation here about how to navigate those tight timeframes successfully. So what's the first thing that you noticed in this conversation?
What really stood out to me was the focus on being super clear and upfront with communication
Okay.
and really trying to get ahead of those potential problems before they even become problems.
Mhm.
Like right away, they're checking in on progress, seeing where everything stands, and brainstorming ways to speed things up without sacrificing quality.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is. It's a delicate balance.
Right, because you don't want to rush things and then end up with a product
Right.
that's not good.
Exactly. You got to find that sweet spot.
Okay, so give me an example of how they're trying to speed things up but still keep the quality high.
Well, they talked about having the testing happen at the same time as some of the final development work.
Okay.
So, like while the developers are wrapping up those last little fixes, the quality assurance team can get a head start on their testing.
Oh, that's smart. So it's like parallelizing the work.
Exactly. It's about maximizing efficiency without cutting corners.
Okay, I like that. And then they also talk about the documentation, right?
Yes. They emphasize having all the documentation ready to go
Mm-hmm.
because they know clients often need those detailed manuals and guides.
Right, because sometimes you have a great product,
Yeah,
but if nobody knows how to use it,
right. It's useless.
it defeats the purpose. Okay, so communication is obviously key here. How are they making sure that everyone's on the same page?
Well, they talk about setting up these regular quick check-ins, like maybe a quick huddle every morning,
Right.
and having a shared online dashboard
Okay.
where everyone can see the progress and spot any potential roadblocks.
Oh, that's really good.
It's about that transparency and that shared understanding of where things stand.
Yeah, and it probably prevents those frantic last-minute scrambles.
Exactly, because everyone's aware of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sounds like they're really detail-oriented.
Oh, yeah.
Give me an example of how that attention to detail really shines through.
Well, they even talk about making sure they have the right hardware for the performance testing,
Mm-hmm.
making sure the systems can handle it. And then they also talk about gathering feedback from beta testers.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, to prioritize those most important fixes.
Yeah, because you're not going to be able to fix everything before the deadline.
Exactly. You got to focus on the most critical issues.
All right, so they're being proactive, they're communicating well, they're paying attention to the details. Is there anything else they're doing to make sure they meet that deadline?
Well, they're really good about assessing the risks.
Okay.
They talk about having a pre-launch review meeting
Mm-hmm.
with a clear checklist and doing another risk assessment
Okay.
just to make sure they haven't overlooked anything.
That's smart.
And then, get this, they even talk about building in some buffer time.
Oh, that's always a good idea.
It is, because things don't always go according to plan.
Never do.
Right. So it's good to have a little wiggle room.
Okay, so for anyone listening who's maybe in the middle of a project that's,
Under the gun.
got a tight deadline, what would you say is the most important thing to remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is communication, communication, communication. Keep those lines open. Be proactive about solving problems. Pay attention to those details. And really carefully assess those potential risks.
Okay, I like that. All right, let's move on to something a little more fun. How do you stay ahead of the curve, especially in an industry like consumer electronics?
Yeah, this is all about innovation and keeping your finger on the pulse.
Right. So we've got a conversation here about what's new and hot in consumer electronics. So what are they observing? What trends are they seeing?
The thing that really jumps out is the emphasis on being innovative and adapting to those constantly shifting market trends.
Mm.
Like right away, they're talking about the rise of wearable tech.
Yeah, that's huge these days.
It is. Everyone's got a smartwatch or fitness tracker,
Yeah.
and they're immediately thinking about how they can get in on that action,
Yeah.
maybe through partnerships, new product lines.
Okay, so they're not just watching the trends. They're
Right.
actively trying to,
They're trying to capitalize on them.
yeah, capitalize.
Yeah, they're not just observers, they're players in the game.
Okay. Now, are they just looking at what they can do, or are they also looking at what their competitors are doing?
Oh, absolutely. They're keeping a close eye on the competition.
Mm.
They're looking at their products, their pricing, their marketing strategies. They're gathering all that intel to inform their own decisions.
That's smart.
Yeah, you got to know what the other guys are doing if you want to stay ahead.
Absolutely. Okay, so it sounds like they're thinking really strategically about this.
They are, and they're thinking long term too.
Okay, how so?
Well, they talk about trying to identify those gaps in the market, those areas where they can introduce something truly new and innovative.
Mm.
And they're also talking about incorporating sustainability into their products.
Oh, that's so important.
It is. Consumers are more and more conscious of environmental impact.
Absolutely.
So that's definitely a smart move.
Okay, so they're thinking about the present, they're thinking about the future. How are they making sure that they stay on top of all these changes?
They're really proactive about staying informed.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about getting regular updates on those market shifts, like weekly reports, and they're even collaborating with research institutions.
Ooh, fancy.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's all about accessing that cutting-edge knowledge
Yeah.
so they can stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, so they're gathering information, they're doing their research. Are they taking any concrete steps to put all this into action?
Oh, yeah, they're not just talking about it. They're planning concrete actions.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, they talk about holding a dedicated workshop with all the relevant department heads
Okay.
to really hammer out a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using data from their marketing analytics team
Mm-hmm.
to make those decisions data-driven.
So it's not just based on gut feeling, it's
Yeah.
based on...
It's based on solid evidence.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they also mentioned a timeline, right?
Yes, they're putting together a 2-year plan.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It is, but it shows they're thinking long-term. But they're also realistic.
Mm-hmm.
They know things can change quickly in this industry, so they're keeping an eye on any potential regulation changes that could impact their plans.
So it's like a long-term plan with built-in flexibility.
Exactly. It's about having a roadmap, but being ready to adjust course if needed.
I like that. Okay, so for someone who's in a fast-paced industry like consumer electronics, what would you say is the most important thing to remember?
I would say the key is to never stop learning. Never stop analyzing that market, embrace innovation, and be ready to adapt quickly.
I love that. Okay, let's switch gears now and talk about something that's essential for any business, and that is client feedback.
Yeah, because without customers,
You have no business.
exactly, they're the lifeblood of any company.
Okay, so we've got a conversation here about how to handle and act on what those customers are telling you. So what's the main focus in a conversation like this?
What really jumps out is how much they value that customer feedback
Okay.
and how they see it as this driving force for continuous improvement.
Okay.
Like right away, they're addressing those usability concerns, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If there are problems, they talk about releasing those quick patch updates if it's software.
Okay, so they're taking it seriously.
They are. They're not just brushing it aside.
Yeah, because sometimes companies get defensive.
Oh, yeah.
When they get negative feedback.
It's like, no, our product is perfect.
Exactly. But these people seem to be very open to it.
They are. They're embracing it.
All right, so it's not just about fixing what's broken, right? They're also looking for ways to really understand what their customers are thinking and feeling.
Absolutely. They talk about collecting those positive testimonials from those happy customers.
Is it good?
Yeah, and using them in their marketing. And they also talk about conducting surveys to get a wider perspective on how people are feeling about their products and services.
Okay, and surveys can be really helpful because you can reach a lot of people that way.
Exactly. And you can gather both quantitative and qualitative data.
Right, so not just like yes or no answers,
Right.
but also like, what do you think about this?
Exactly. You get those rich insights into how people are actually using and experiencing your product.
Okay, now it sounds like they're really proactive about gathering this feedback.
Oh, they are. They're not just waiting for it to come to them.
Right, like, How so? What are they doing?
Well, they talk about having these regular monthly reviews of the client feedback.
Okay.
So it's not just a one-time thing.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
Right. They're constantly checking in.
They are. And they even suggest creating a customer advisory board.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, to get ongoing input from those key customers.
That's a really good idea. So it's not just like random people off the street. It's
Right.
people who actually
It's your most valuable customer.
use your product. And
Exactly.
doubt it.
Yeah, they're invested in your success.
Okay, so they're gathering all this feedback. Are they actually doing anything with it?
Oh, yeah, they're not just collecting it for fun.
Right.
They talk about responding quickly to those critical suggestions, especially those that impact functionality.
Okay.
They want to fix those problems as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's important.
It is. It shows they're listening and they care.
Yeah, because sometimes you give feedback and then you never hear anything back.
Oh, yeah. It's like, did they even read my email?
Exactly. And then you feel like your feedback doesn't matter.
Right. It can be really frustrating.
But it sounds like these people are really taking it to heart.
They are. And they even talk about publicly thanking those clients who provide really helpful feedback.
Oh, that's nice.
It is. It makes people feel valued and appreciated.
Yeah, so it's not just about fixing the problem. It's about
Right.
building that relationship.
Exactly. It's about fostering those strong customer relationships.
Okay, last question on this one. What's the key takeaway for anyone listening who's maybe struggling with how to handle client feedback effectively?
I think the main message is to be proactive about seeking out that feedback.
Yeah.
Analyze it carefully, and then actually act on it.
Yeah.
It's a crucial way to improve your products and keep your customers happy.
Okay, I love that. All right, let's move on to something that's essential for any company that wants to have a skilled workforce, and that is planning a really good staff training program.
Yes, because investing in your employees is investing in your company's future.
Exactly. So we have a conversation here about how to do that effectively. What stands out to you? What are they focusing on?
What's really interesting is how detail-oriented they are about making sure that knowledge and those skills are transferred effectively. Like right from the start, they're talking about defining those training objectives.
Mhm.
What do they want people to learn?
Right.
And then they talk about using interactive workshops to make it more engaging.
Okay, because nobody wants to just sit through a lecture.
Exactly. People learn best by doing.
Yeah, okay, so they're thinking about the format of the training. Are they
Yeah.
thinking about the logistics as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They talk about scheduling those training sessions over a few weeks,
Okay.
so it's not overwhelming for the employees. And they also talk about using feedback forms to get input from the participants.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, because you want to know what worked well and what could be improved for next time.
Yes, and it makes the employees feel like their opinions are valued.
Exactly. It shows you're invested in their learning experience.
Okay, so they're being really thoughtful about how they design the training program.
Yeah.
Are they also thinking about who's actually going to deliver the training?
Oh, yeah. They're considering all their options.
Yeah.
They talk about maybe using internal experts for some topics,
Mm-hmm.
but also bringing in external trainers for those more specialized or technical subjects.
Right, so it's a mix.
It is. It's about finding the best fit for each topic.
Okay. And then they also talked about something about after the training.
Yes. They're thinking about how to make that knowledge stick.
Okay.
So they talk about recording those sessions
Oh, that's a good idea.
so people can refer back to them later, or if someone missed a session, they can catch up. And then they also talk about creating those quick reference guides, just those handy little summaries of the key points.
Yeah, because sometimes you're in the middle of a task and you're like, wait, how do I do this again?
Exactly. And you need that quick reminder.
Mhm.
So those guides can be super helpful.
Okay, so it sounds like they're really going above and beyond to make sure this training is effective.
They are. And they even talk about having quizzes during the training sessions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, just to make sure people are paying attention and absorbing the information.
And it probably keeps it a little more fun and engaging.
Exactly. It breaks things up a bit.
Okay, so the training is done. Everybody's learned a lot. What happens next?
Well, they're not just leaving people to fend for themselves.
Right.
They talk about setting up a mentoring program.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, where more experienced employees can support those who are newer to the role or the company.
Mm-hmm.
It provides that ongoing support and guidance.
Okay, and then they also talk about something about measuring the effectiveness of the training.
Oh, yes. They're not just assuming it worked. They're looking for concrete evidence.
Okay.
So they talk about tracking things like efficiency gains.
Mm-hmm.
Are people completing tasks faster now that they've had the training?
Right.
And they're compiling all this into a final report.
Okay.
so they can see what worked well and what needs to be tweaked for future training programs.
So it's like a continuous improvement cycle.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
all about making sure the training is really delivering results.
Okay, so for someone who's maybe in charge of putting together a staff training program, what's the main message here?
I think the key takeaway is to be really thorough and intentional in your planning. Define those goals, make it interactive, provide ongoing support, and measure the results.
Okay, I like that. Now let's talk about something that I think a lot of teams struggle with, and that is time management.
Oh, yeah, that can be a tough one.
Right. So we have a conversation here about how to help a team that's just not managing their time effectively. So what are they suggesting? What are some of the strategies?
Well, right away, they're talking about the importance of both productivity and well-being.
Okay.
It's not just about getting things done. It's about doing them in a way that's sustainable for the team.
Right, because you don't want people burning out.
Exactly. You want to prevent that burnout.
So what are they doing to achieve that balance?
Well, they talk about gathering those useful tools and best practices like prioritization framework.
Okay.
Like one they mentioned was the Eisenhower matrix, which helps you categorize tasks by urgency and importance.
Okay, so it helps you figure out what to do first.
Exactly. It's about focusing on those most critical tasks.
Yeah, because sometimes you feel like you're doing a million things,
Yeah.
but none of them are actually the most important things.
Right? You're busy, but not productive.
Exactly.
So that prioritization framework can really help with that.
Okay, and then they also talk about some other strategies, right?
Oh, yeah, they're full of ideas.